Chapter 2. The Hall That Breathes. Inside the hall of held stories, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, slower. Maren noticed it, the way you notice a change in tide before you see it. The way your skin knows a storm is coming, long before clouds gather. The sounds from outside did not stop. They simply softened, as if the stone walls had gently asked the village to lower its voice. Her footsteps became careful without her meaning them to. The floor beneath her was smooth stone, worn by years of passing feet, but it held a faint warmth, as if the hall remembered every person who had walked here and still held a little of their heat. Light entered from narrow openings near the high roof. It did not fall in harsh beams. It drifted. It curved. It seemed to float rather than shine, as if the hall preferred gentle illumination over anything that demanded attention. Maren stood just inside the threshold for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The hall was circular, and its walls were carved with flowing patterns that reminded her of water lines drawn in sand. Spirals, waves, thin, looping shapes that looked almost like fingerprints. The carvings were not decoration for decoration's sake. They felt like language. She traced one spiral with her fingertip and felt the stone's quiet certainty. It was cool, but not cold. Alive in the way that old things can be alive. Steady with the kind of presence that doesn't need to prove itself. Behind her, Callan and Lyra paused too, as if they had stepped into a space that required a different pace of breathing. Story walked ahead, unhurried, their braided hair catching the pale light as if it had been woven with dew. They moved like someone who belonged to the hall, the way a lantern belongs to night, not as an object, but as a natural part of the scene. Maren's gaze went to the shelves. They ran along the curve of the walls, rising in gentle tiers. The shelves were carved directly from stone, smooth and rounded, and upon them sat glass vessels of every size and shape. Some were no bigger than a teacup. Some were as wide as a washing basin. Some were tall and slender, like bottles meant for letters. Others were squat and heavy, like jars meant for preserving fruit. The glass caught the drifting light and returned it in soft glimmers. Some vessels glowed brightly, as if a small sun had been trapped inside. Some barely glowed at all, holding only a faint shimmer that might have been imagination if Maren hadn't felt how steady it was. And some looked empty until she stared for a long moment, at which point she began to notice movement inside them. Not shapes, exactly. More like the suggestion of a moment. The way you can see a memory without seeing it clearly. Maren's throat tightened. "What is all this?" she asked quietly, afraid that louder words might ripple the air. Callan's voice came softer than usual, as if he respected the room's calm. "Stories," he said, "but not like books." Story stopped near the center and turned, their gaze settling on Maren in a way that felt like being seen without being weighed. "Stories the way the sea holds them," Story said, "in feelings, in choices, in moments that change the shape of a life." Maren looked closer at the nearest shelf. A small vessel glowed faintly gold. The light inside pulsed gently, like breathing. Another beside it glowed a pale blue that reminded her of early dawn over still water. She reached toward the gold vessel without thinking, then stopped her hand a few inches away. "Can I touch them?" she asked. Lyra smiled, one corner of her mouth lifting. "Most of them, yes. Some prefer not to be disturbed." Maren glanced at Lyra. "Prefer?" Lyra shrugged lightly. "Stories can be shy." Callan made a soft sound of agreement. "Or stubborn Lyra shot him a look that said he was talking about himself. Maren's fingers hovered again. Then she touched the glass lightly. The vessel warmed beneath her fingertips. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden flash. No shock. Just a gentle warmth that spread into her hand. And with it, a feeling. A kitchen, maybe. Warm bread. The sound of someone humming while stirring a pot. A quiet kind of contentment that had nothing to do with having everything. Perfect and everything to do with being safe enough to be ordinary. Maren drew her hand back, breathing slowly. That was, she began, someone's Tuesday. Kellen said softly. Maren blinked at him. He smiled. Some people don't think their ordinary days matter. Tide Hollow disagrees. Story moved along the shelves, pausing here and there. Maren followed, her steps slow, her gaze absorbing everything. There was a vessel that held a flickering red glow, like sunset on water, when Maren looked at it. Her chest filled with a sense of courage she didn't recognize as her own. A decision made in the middle of fear. A choice to step forward anyway. There was a vessel that held a pale green shimmer, and when Maren passed it, she felt a sudden softness, like forgiveness unfolding. Not for something huge and dramatic, just forgiveness for being human, for being tired, for not knowing what to say. There was another vessel, dark and almost opaque, and Maren felt herself tense slightly. Lyra noticed and touched her elbow gently. That one is grief, Lyra said, voice careful. It's not dangerous, but it can pull at you if you're not ready. Maren nodded, grateful for the warning. Story stopped at a low shelf near the center, where two vessels sat apart from the others. One glowed faintly blue. The other was clear. Story lifted the glowing one first and held it between their palms. The light inside shifted and resolved into something so familiar that Maren's breath caught before she could stop it. Wooden platforms, gently swaying, lanterns hanging from hooks, the curved paths between homes, the tall lighthouse rising at the center, its beam turning slowly through the dark. Maren's floating village. Her beginning. My home, she whispered. Story nodded. The sea preserved it for you. Maren stared, and the moment inside the glass sharpened. She saw her father's hands, the way he checked knots out of habit, his fingers, moving with a confidence that had been earned through repetition and care. She saw the way the lantern light made his face softer at night. She heard, faintly, the creak of ropes and the low hush of water against wood. Her chest tightened in that tender way again. She had told herself she wasn't leaving home behind. She had told herself her world was widening, not stretching thin, but seeing it here, held in glass, made the truth feel heavier and sweeter at the same time. Story returned the glowing vessel to the shelf and lifted the clear one. This is yours, Story said, offering it to Maren. Maren took it carefully. The glass was smooth, perfectly shaped to her hands. It was warm, though it held no light. It's empty, she said, feeling almost foolish for stating the obvious. For now, Story replied. This vessel does not rush. It will fill itself when moments worth holding arrive. Maren turned the glass slowly in her hands. The surface reflected her face, then blurred, as if it couldn't decide which version of her to show. The Maren who had grown up on floating wood. The Maren who had stepped onto land and felt her knees wobble. The Maren who had followed a humming sea to a listening island. What if I don't know which moments matter? She asked quietly. Story smiled, just slightly. You will, The ones that return when the world is quiet. The ones that stay with you after the day ends. Those are the ones that belong here. Kellen leaned closer, voice low, as if the hall itself might be listening. Nobody fills theirs all at once. And no two look the same, Lyra added. Some are bright. Some are soft. Some take a long time to glow. That doesn't mean they aren't full. Maren nodded, letting those words settle in her chest like something placed carefully on a shelf. Sori gestured for them to walk. They moved deeper into the hall, toward the shelves that rose higher. As they went, Sori spoke in a voice that felt like a slow river. Tide Hollow was built here because the currents meet in a gentle way. Not crashing, not fighting, just weaving together. Long ago, people came here tired of storms. Tired of being pulled by things they couldn't control. They wanted a place where stories could be held without being forced into endings. Maren listened, her steps matching Sori's pace. They found the island, Sori continued. And they found that the island listened, not with ears, with presence, with patience, with the steady agreement to hold whatever arrived. Maren glanced around. So these vessels are how we honor that agreement, Sori said. They stopped at a shelf where several vessels glowed faintly, all in similar shades of blue. These belong to the same family, Sori said. 3 generations. 3 different kinds of courage. A grandmother who crossed the sea alone. A mother who chose to stay. A child who chose to leave and come back. The stories are different, but the thread between them is steady. Maren's fingers drifted toward one of the vessels. She didn't touch it, but she could feel its hum, like a quiet heartbeat. Sori moved on. Further along, a cluster of vessels held a warm amber glow. These are love stories, Kellen whispered. Lyra snorted softly. Not all of them. Kellen's grin flickered. Fine. Some are foolish love stories. Lyra's eyes sparkled. There you go, Maren smiled, appreciating the way their voices stayed soft, as if even teasing belonged to the hall's calm. She looked at the amber vessels and felt different kinds of love radiating faintly. A love between friends who had weathered many small storms. A love between a parent and a child, fierce and quiet. A love that had started clumsy and grown steady. A love that had ended, but still left warmth behind. She wondered what her own love stories looked like, if they would ever sit on these shelves. As they walked, Maren began to notice something else. The hall itself had a rhythm, not a sound, not a movement, but a subtle sense of breathing, like the air expanded and settled in slow pulses. She paused, head tilting. Do you feel that? She asked. Lyra nodded immediately. It's listening, Kellen added. It does that when someone new steps in. Maren's eyebrows lifted. It listens harder when someone new is here? Sori glanced back, a faint smile in their eyes. It pays attention when a new story arrives. Maren swallowed, suddenly aware of herself in a new way. She had always felt like the sea listened to her, in its own vast and different tenderness. But the idea of a hall listening, of an island noticing her, made her feel important in a quiet way, not special in a dramatic sense, more like recognized, counted, included. They reached a section of shelves where the vessels looked different. These were not round or smooth. They had odd shapes, like they had been formed around something. Some had small imperfections in the glass, tiny bubbles caught inside. Some were slightly cloudy, as if fog lived within them. What are these? Maren asked. Kellen's voice softened further. Hard Stories? Sori nodded. Stories that don't want to be polished. Stories that remain complicated. We do not smooth them down here. We do not make them prettier for comfort. We simply hold them until the person who brought them is ready to hold them too. Maren stared at the imperfect vessels and felt a quiet respect rise in her. Her floating village held its own hard stories. Storms that took boats. Arguments that never fully resolved. People who left and did not return. But there was no shelf for those things there. No place to set them down. They just lived in the air, between people, unspoken. Here, even the hard stories had a place. Sori lifted one of the cloudy vessels carefully. Inside, a dim gray shimmer moved like slow smoke. Maren felt a sudden wave of weariness, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Sori set it back down gently, like setting down something fragile. This one belongs to a man who tried to be strong for everyone, Sori said. When he finally came here, he was exhausted in a way that had no words. We held that exhaustion for him until he could admit it to himself. Maren's throat tightened. She thought of her father again, of his steady hands, of the way he never complained, even when storms made his shoulders tense. She wondered what he carried without saying. She forced herself not to spiral into worry. She reminded herself of what Sori had said. The hall does not rush. Stories are allowed to unfold. They walked again, curving toward the back of the hall. There, the shelves lowered, and the space opened. A low circular table sat in the center, carved from a single piece of pale stone. On it rested a shallow bowl filled with water. The water was perfectly still, so still that it looked like glass. Maren approached slowly. "What is that?" she asked. Sori stood beside her, a mirror for the stories that don't fit in vessels yet. Maren leaned over the bowl. At first, she saw only her reflection, slightly blurred by the pale light above. Then, the reflection shifted. She saw the sea, deep and dark. She saw herself in a small boat, following a faint glow beneath the waves. She saw the shimmering coral blooming, like underwater stars. Her breath caught again. "That's my journey," she whispered. Sori nodded. "The sea brought you here," the hall noticed. "The story is already forming." Maren watched the water shift, offering glimpses of moments she had lived, and moments she had only just begun. She saw Kellen's grin, Lyra's steady hands, Sori's calm gaze, the silver-leafed trees, their whispering leaves, the waterlight tower's bowl, reflecting sky. Then the image softened and faded back into her face. Maren straightened, feeling both small and expansive at once. "How does it work?" she asked. Lyra's voice came from behind her, gentle. "It doesn't work. It listens, like everything here. Like you." Maren turned and saw Lyra holding a small toolkit, as if she had come straight from her workshop. Kellen leaned against a pillar, arms folded, looking unusually thoughtful. "Do you know why the sea hummed about you?" Kellen asked quietly. Maren hesitated. "Because I traveled here." Kellen shook his head slightly. "Because you listen back." Maren frowned. "What does that mean?" Sori answered. "Many people hear the sea. Few let it change them." Maren felt those words settle like stones, placed gently in her hands. She thought of her nights at the lighthouse, of sitting beneath its turning beam, and feeling, somehow, that it listened to her quiet thoughts. She had not just been comforted by that. She had responded. She had thanked it. She had spoken to it in her mind as if it mattered. Maybe it did matter. Maybe listening back was not just hearing. It was honoring. Maren looked again at the vessels lining the shelves. "Do I get one?" she asked. Voice small. Lyra's eyes softened. "You already did." Maren glanced back toward the low shelf where her clear vessel waited. Empty, warm, patient. She walked to it, slowly. When she reached it, she placed her hands around the glass and held it for a moment, feeling its quiet readiness. She didn't know what would fill it. She didn't know which moments would glow and which would remain soft and faint. But she knew something else now. Her story had arrived here, and it was being held. She returned the vessel to the shelf gently, not as something unfinished, but as something alive. When she turned back, Sori had moved to the entrance of the hall. Kellen and Lyra followed, their footsteps quiet. Maren lingered a moment longer, gaze sweeping over the shelves. Held stories, hard stories, love stories, ordinary Tuesdays, quiet courage. The hall breathed around her, slow and steady. She felt a subtle shift, like a nod, like the island itself acknowledging her presence. Maren stepped toward the doorway. As she crossed the threshold back into the open air of Tide Hollow, she felt the village's sounds return. The gentle clink of tools, the murmur of voices, the far-off hush of waves. But something had changed. The world outside did not feel louder. It felt held, as if the hall had taught her something about carrying life, without gripping it too tight. Kellen fell into step beside her. "You look different," he said, voice light but not teasing. Maren glanced at him. "Different? How?" "Like you took a deep breath and forgot to stop," he said. Lyra snorted softly from her other side. "That's the first sign of island illness." Maren blinked. "Illness. The kind where you start believing you don't have to rush," Lyra said. Maren's smile grew. Sori walked ahead, their braids swaying gently. "Come," they said. "The day is waiting. And the sea is still humming." Maren followed them down the path, silver leaves whispering overhead and far away. Beyond the horizon, her lighthouse stood steady, turning its light through another night that would eventually come. She did not feel the ache of distance as sharply now. She felt the shape of connection instead. A story that could stretch without breaking. A beginning that could widen into something gentle. And in her chest, like a small warm vessel not yet filled, something new settled into place, patient and ready for what came next.